Rescue title: Baby saw a bear cub locked in a medical office supply room. What he did next. Prescribed healing. The last patient had left 20 minutes ago, but Dr. Ethan Marshall still heard something scratching behind the supply room door. He stood in the empty hallway of his small medical clinic, fluorescent lights humming overhead, casting long shadows across the polished floor. His 5-year-old son Leo sat in the waiting area, coloring in a book about animals, completely absorbed in filling a tiger's stripes with orange crayon. The scratching sound came again, soft but persistent, like fingernails against wood. Ethan checked his watch. 7:30 in the evening, well past closing time. The cleaning crew wouldn't arrive until midnight. He walked closer to the supply room, pressing his ear against the door. The sound stopped immediately, replaced by a strange, muffled whimpering that made the hair on his arms stand up. The supply room had been locked since morning, when Jessica Brooks, his nurse, had complained about finding the door ajar despite locking it the night before. Nothing had been missing, but Jessica had insisted on using the padlock from then on. Now, standing in the dim hallway, Ethan fumbled for his keys, the metal cold against his fingers. The whimpering grew louder, more desperate. It didn't sound human. It didn't sound like any animal that should be in a medical office either. His rational mind told him it was probably a stray cat that had somehow gotten trapped, but something about the quality of the sound made his chest tighten with an inexplicable urgency. Leo appeared beside him suddenly, a small hand tugging at his father's white coat. The boy's eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a strange kind of recognition, as if he knew exactly what was making that sound. "Daddy, we need to help," Leo whispered, his voice carrying a certainty that seemed beyond his years. The key turned in the lock with a sharp click. Ethan pushed the door open slowly, reaching for the light switch with his free hand. The fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, illuminating rows of medical supplies, boxes of gauze, bottles of antiseptic, and there, huddled in the corner between a shelf of bandages and a case of syringes, was something that made Ethan's breath catch in his throat. A bear cub, no bigger than a cocker spaniel, trembled against the wall. Its dark fur was matted with something that looked like dried mud, and its eyes, impossibly large and brown, stared at them with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. The cub couldn't have been more than a few months old. Its breathing was rapid, shallow, and Ethan's medical training kicked in automatically, noting signs of dehydration and stress. Leo moved before Ethan could stop him, dropping to his knees and crawling toward the frightened animal with slow, deliberate movements. The cub pressed itself harder against the wall, a low growl rumbling from its tiny chest. But Leo didn't retreat. He sat cross-legged on the cold linoleum floor, about 3 feet from the cub, and began humming softly. It was a melody Ethan recognized, the same lullaby his late wife used to sing to Leo when he was a baby. The transformation was immediate and mesmerizing. The cub's growling stopped. Its ears, which had been flattened against its head, slowly perked up. Leo extended his hand. Palm up, fingers relaxed, and waited. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the air conditioning system. Minutes passed like hours. Then, with movements so slow they seemed almost dreamlike, the cub inched forward, nose twitching as it sniffed the air around Leo's hand. The moment the cub's wet nose touched Leo's fingers, something shifted in the room's atmosphere. Ethan felt it like a change in air pressure before a storm. The cub crawled into Leo's lap, curling into a ball so small it seemed impossible that this was a creature that would one day grow to weigh hundreds of pounds. Leo's face lit up with a joy so pure that Ethan felt tears prick at his eyes. He thought of his wife, Sarah, who had died 2 years ago in a car accident, and how she would have loved this moment. She had always believed in the impossible, in magic hiding in ordinary places. Ethan had been the skeptic, the man of science who needed proof and logic. But standing there, watching his son cradle a wild animal that should have been terrified, that should have been aggressive, he felt the foundations of his certainty crack. "How did it get in here?" Ethan whispered, not wanting to break whatever spell had been cast. The question hung in the air, unanswered and somehow unimportant. Leo looked up at his father with those same brown eyes he had inherited from Sarah, eyes that always seemed to see more than they should. "He's lost, Daddy. He's looking for someone." The words sent a chill down Ethan's spine. How could Leo know that? How could he know anything about this cub? But before he could ask, the cub stirred in Leo's arms, and Ethan noticed something he had missed before. Around the cub's right front paw was a band, not a collar, but something that looked handmade, woven from what appeared to be dried grass and thin strips of leather. Attached to it was a small wooden tag, no bigger than a quarter, with symbols carved into it that Ethan didn't recognize. He knelt beside his son, his knees protesting against the hard floor, and gently examined the cub without touching it. The animal was definitely malnourished, its ribs visible beneath the matted fur. There were no obvious injuries, but the way it breathed suggested it had been running for a long time, perhaps days. The supply room had no windows, no other entrance except the door they had come through. The ventilation grate was too small for even a mouse to squeeze through. The impossibility of the situation pressed against Ethan's logical mind like a weight. Bears didn't exist in this part of the city. The nearest forest was 50 miles away. Even if someone had brought the cub here deliberately, how had they gotten it into a locked room without anyone noticing? The clinic had been busy all day, patients coming and going, Jessica and the other staff members constantly moving through the hallways. Leo began to stand, the cub still cradled in his arms like a large, furry baby. "We need to give him water, Daddy, and food. He's very hungry." The boy's voice was matter-of-fact, as if finding a bear cub in a medical supply room was the most natural thing in the world. Ethan's first instinct was to call animal control, to follow protocol, to do the responsible thing, but looking at his son's face, at the way the cub had trusted Leo completely, he hesitated. There was something else at play here, something that transcended normal procedures and rational responses. He thought about the last 2 years, about how Leo had retreated into himself after Sarah's death, how the boy had stopped laughing, stopped playing with other children, stopped being the vibrant, curious child he had once been. This was the first time in months that Ethan had seen real life in his son's eyes. They moved to Ethan's office, Leo walking carefully with the cub, which had fallen asleep in his arms. Ethan grabbed supplies from the examination rooms, a bowl for water, some towels, a heating pad. He had no idea what to feed a bear cub, but he found some milk in the staff refrigerator and warmed it slightly. The cub woke when Leo set it down on the towels Ethan had arranged on the floor. It drank the water eagerly, its pink tongue lapping with desperate intensity. The milk disappeared just as quickly. As the cub ate, Ethan examined the band on its paw more closely. The symbols weren't random. They had a pattern, a meaning he couldn't decipher. The leather was old, worn smooth by time, but the grass weaving was fresh, probably no more than a few days old. Someone had recently repaired or replaced it. "Should we name him?" Leo asked, sitting cross-legged beside the cub, which had finished eating and was now exploring the office with cautious curiosity. It sniffed at Ethan's medical bag, investigated the wheels of his chair, and then returned to Leo, climbing back into his lap with a satisfied grunt. "I don't think we can keep him, buddy," Ethan said gently, though the words felt wrong even as he spoke them. He belongs in the wild. We need to find where he came from. Leo's face didn't fall as Ethan expected. Instead, the boy smiled, a knowing smile that reminded Ethan so much of Sarah it made his chest ache. He's not lost anymore, Daddy. He found us. The next hour passed in a strange bubble of calm. Ethan called Jessica, telling her not to come in early the next morning, that he would handle opening the clinic. He didn't mention the cub. How could he explain something he didn't understand himself? Leo and the cub played on the office floor, the animal displaying a gentleness that defied everything Ethan knew about wild creatures. It would bat at Leo's hands with paws that could one day kill with a single swipe. But its claws remained retracted, its touch soft as velvet. When Leo rolled a tennis ball across the floor, the cub chased it with clumsy enthusiasm, tumbling over its own feet in a way that made both Ethan and Leo laugh. The sound of his son's laughter, real and unforced, filled the office like music. As the evening deepened into night, Ethan found himself sitting on the floor beside Leo, the cub now sleeping between them, its small body rising and falling with each breath. The office felt different, warmer somehow, as if the presence of this impossible visitor had changed the very molecules of the air. Leo leaned against his father's shoulder, and Ethan put his arm around his son, pulling him close. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the cub sleep, and Ethan realized that for the first time since Sarah's death, the crushing weight of grief had lifted slightly from his chest. It wasn't gone, might never be completely gone, but in this moment, with his son beside him and this mysterious creature trusting them with its life, he felt something he had thought lost forever. Hope. "Daddy," Leo said quietly, his voice heavy with approaching sleep. Mommy would have loved him. Ethan's throat tightened. Yes, she would have. They sat there for another few minutes before Ethan realized they needed to make a decision. They couldn't stay in the office all night, and they couldn't leave the cub here alone. Taking it home seemed insane, but leaving it felt impossible. As if reading his thoughts, Leo stirred and looked up at him. "We have to take him home, Daddy, just for tonight. He's scared to be alone." The logic of a 5-year-old, simple and irrefutable. Ethan found himself nodding, already mentally planning how to transport a bear cub without anyone noticing. He had a large medical supply bag in his car, used for house calls. If the cub stayed calm, if it stayed quiet, they might make it the 10-minute drive to their house without incident. He wrapped the sleeping cub in towels, creating a makeshift nest inside the bag, leaving the top partially unzipped for air. The cub stirred but didn't wake, seemingly exhausted from whatever journey had brought it to them. Leo carried Ethan's regular briefcase, walking with exaggerated care as if he were carrying something infinitely precious. The parking lot was empty, the night air cool against their skin. The city sounds seemed distant, muffled, as if they were moving through a dream. They loaded into Ethan's sedan, the bag with the cub placed carefully on the back seat with Leo beside it, one small hand resting protectively on the bag. The drive home was surreal. Every red light seemed to last forever, every passing car a potential threat to their secret. But Leo hummed that same lullaby, and the cub remained quiet, occasionally making small snuffling sounds that made Leo giggle softly. Ethan watched them in the rearview mirror, his son and this impossible creature, and wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life or following some path that had been laid out long before tonight. Sarah would have known, he thought. She would have trusted her instincts without question. She would have seen the magic in this moment and embraced it fully. Their house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, backed by a small grove of trees that provided privacy from the neighbors. Ethan pulled into the garage, closing the door behind them before turning on the light. They moved quickly but carefully, Leo leading the way into the house while Ethan carried the bag with the cub. The animal woke as they entered the living room, its head popping out of the bag to survey its new surroundings with curious eyes. Ethan set the bag down gently, and the cub climbed out, shaking itself like a dog after a bath. It explored the living room with the same careful curiosity it had shown in the office, sniffing at the couch, investigating the coffee table, and finally settling on the rug in front of the cold fireplace. "We need to make him a bed," Leo announced, already gathering cushions from the couch. Together, they created a nest of pillows and blankets near the fireplace. The cub watched them work, its head tilted to one side as if trying to understand what these strange humans were doing. When they finished, Leo patted the makeshift bed invitingly, and the cub patted over, circling 3 times before settling down with a contented sigh. It was such a normal, domestic gesture that Ethan had to laugh. Here was a wild animal, a creature that should be in the forest with its mother, making itself at home in their living room as if it had always belonged there. Leo lay down on the floor beside the cub's bed, one hand resting on its fur. "Tell me a story, Daddy," he requested, his voice already drowsy. Ethan sat in his armchair, looking at his son and their unusual guest, and began to speak. He told the story Sarah used to tell, about a little boy who could talk to animals, who understood their language not with his ears but with his heart. As he spoke, he watched the cub's eyes slowly close, watched his son's breathing deepen and slow. The house felt full in a way it hadn't since Sarah's death. Full of life and possibility and something indefinable that made the air itself seem to shimmer. When both boy and cub were asleep, Ethan remained in his chair, standing guard over this impossible scene. He thought about calling someone, about doing the responsible thing, but every time he reached for his phone, he stopped. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow he would figure out what to do. But tonight was for magic, for impossible things, for believing that maybe, just maybe, some things happened for reasons beyond understanding. He thought about the locked door, about how the cub had gotten into that room, and realized that perhaps the how didn't matter as much as the why. Why had this creature come to them? Why had Leo known exactly what to do? Why did it feel so right to have it here? The questions swirled in his mind as the night deepened. Outside, the city continued its restless existence, but inside the house, in this bubble of warmth and impossibility, time seemed to slow. Ethan found himself dozing, jerking awake periodically to check on Leo and the cub, both of whom slept peacefully, the boy's hand never leaving the animal's fur. Around midnight, the cub stirred, whimpering softly. Leo woke immediately, as if connected to the animal by some invisible thread. "He's having a bad dream," Leo whispered, stroking the cub's head gently. "It's okay, you're safe now, we've got you." The cub settled, pressing closer to Leo, and both fell back asleep within minutes. Ethan watched this exchange with a mixture of wonder and concern. His son was displaying an empathy, an intuition about this animal that seemed almost supernatural. But more than that, Leo was displaying a confidence, a purpose that had been absent since Sarah's death. It was as if the cub's arrival had awakened something in the boy, some dormant ability or understanding that had been waiting for exactly this moment. The thought should have been disturbing, but instead, it felt right, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. He remembered Sarah's words, spoken just days before the accident. "Leo is special, Ethan. He sees things we don't. Don't try to logic it away, just let him be who he is meant to be. The memory brought tears to his eyes. Had she known something like this would happen? Had she sensed that Leo would need this connection, this purpose, after she was gone? It seemed impossible. But then again, so did finding a bear cub in a locked medical supply room. Ethan had built his life on facts, on science, on things that could be measured and proven. But sitting here in the dark, watching his son sleep beside a wild animal that trusted him completely, he felt the boundaries of his certainty dissolving. There were things in this world that couldn't be explained by medical journals or scientific studies. There were mysteries that didn't need solving, only accepting. The cub woke again around 2 in the morning, this time clearly hungry. Ethan heated more milk, added some honey he found in the pantry, and watched as the animal drank eagerly. Leo woke too, rubbing his eyes sleepily but smiling when he saw the cub eating. "He's getting stronger," Leo observed, and Ethan had to agree. Even in the few hours since they had found it, the cub seemed more alert, more vital. Its eyes were brighter, its movements more coordinated. It was as if being with them, being cared for, was healing something deeper than physical hunger or exhaustion. After eating, the cub played for a while, batting at a ball of yarn Leo found, chasing shadows on the wall cast by the nightlight. It was simultaneously heartbreaking and beautiful to watch, this wild creature reduced to kittenish play, separated from its mother and natural habitat, yet seemingly content in their living room. Leo laughed at the cub's antics, a sound that filled the house with joy. Ethan found himself laughing too, despite the absurdity of the situation, despite the problems tomorrow would surely bring. In this moment, none of that mattered. Only this mattered: his son's happiness, the cub's trust, the feeling that they were part of something larger than themselves. As the night wore on, Ethan made a decision. He wouldn't call animal control in the morning. Not immediately. He would wait, observe, try to understand what had brought this creature to them. The rational part of his mind protested, listing all the reasons this was dangerous, irresponsible, possibly illegal. But a deeper part, a part that sounded remarkably like Sarah's voice, told him to trust, to have faith, to let the mystery unfold in its own time. He thought about the band on the cub's paw, the symbols that suggested someone, somewhere, knew about this animal. Perhaps they would come looking for it. Perhaps there was more to this story than a simple case of a lost animal. Leo and the cub finally settled back to sleep around 3, this time with Leo using the cub as a pillow, his head resting on the animal's soft fur. The trust between them was absolute, incomprehensible, and beautiful. Ethan covered them both with a light blanket and returned to his chair, unable to sleep, unwilling to miss a moment of this impossible night. He thought about the patients he would see tomorrow, the normal routine of his medical practice, and wondered how he could return to that mundane world after experiencing this. How could he pretend that life was ordinary when he had proof that magic still existed? The first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky outside when Ethan heard something that made his blood run cold. A soft knocking at the front door, so quiet he almost thought he had imagined it. Then it came again. 3 gentle taps, patient but insistent. Who would be at their door at 5 in the morning? His first thought was animal control, that somehow someone had seen them bring the cub home. But the knocking was too polite, too gentle for any official visit. Ethan stood slowly, his joints stiff from sitting all night, and moved toward the door. He looked through the peephole but saw no one. The knocking came again, this time from lower on the door, as if the person knocking was very short or kneeling. He opened the door cautiously, the chain still engaged, and looked down. An elderly woman stood on his porch, barely 5 feet tall, wearing a coat that seemed to be made of moss and leaves. Her hair was white as snow, braided with what looked like wildflowers, and her eyes were the same brown as the cub's, deep and knowing and ancient. She smiled at him, a smile that was both sad and joyful, and spoke in a voice that sounded like wind through trees. "Dr. Marshall, I believe you have someone who belongs to me." The words should have been threatening, should have made him slam the door and call the police. Instead, they filled him with a strange sense of relief, as if he had been waiting for her all along. "Who are you?" he asked, though somehow he felt he already knew the answer, or at least part of it. The woman's smile widened. "My name is Lily Morgan, and I've been looking for that little one for 3 days. May I come in?" Everything rational in Ethan screamed no, but he found himself removing the chain and stepping aside. Lily walked into his house with the confidence of someone who had been there before, though Ethan knew she hadn't. She moved directly to the living room, where she stopped, her hand going to her heart at the sight of Leo and the cub sleeping entwined on the floor. "Oh," she breathed, and in that single word was a world of emotion. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect him." She gestured to Leo, and Ethan felt protective anger rise in his chest. "What do you want with my son?" But Lily shook her head, her eyes never leaving the sleeping pair. "Nothing, Dr. Marshall. Nothing at all. But your son has a gift. Surely you've noticed the way animals trust him, the way he understands without words." The anger drained from Ethan as quickly as it had come, replaced by a recognition he didn't want to acknowledge. He had noticed, of course he had. Even before Sarah's death, Leo had been different. Birds would land on his outstretched hand in the park. Stray cats would follow him home. The neighbor's aggressive dog would become gentle as a lamb in his presence. "The cub," Lily continued, finally turning to look at Ethan, "is not just any cub. He's the last of his line, the last of a very special group of bears that once lived in the forests that stood where this city now sprawls. His mother was killed by a truck 3 days ago, trying to lead him to safety. I've been caring for them, you see, in secret, in the small wild spaces that remain. But when she died, he ran. I've been searching everywhere, following his trail, but I lost him in the city streets. I never imagined he would find his way to someone like your son." The story was impossible, fantastical, the kind of thing Ethan would have dismissed as delusion just yesterday. But looking at the elderly woman, at the way she gazed at the cub with such love and sorrow, he found himself believing every word. "How did he get into the supply room?" he asked, needing at least one concrete answer. Lily's eyes twinkled with something that might have been mischief. "The same way I got onto your porch without you seeing me approach. The same way your son knows how to calm a frightened wild animal. There are paths in this world that most people don't see, Doctor. Doors that open for those who need them. The cub was frightened, seeking safety, and somehow he knew that room in your clinic would be a sanctuary until the right person found him." "And Leo is the right person?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. Lily nodded slowly. "Your son has a gift that's becoming rarer with each passing year. He can bridge the gap between the wild and the civilized, between human and animal. The cub sensed this, was drawn to it like a magnet. In the old days, we would have called your son a beast speaker, someone who could translate between worlds. Now, we just call them special, gifted, different, but the truth remains the same. Your son and this cub were meant to find each other." As if summoned by the conversation, Leo stirred, his eyes opening slowly. He looked at Lily without surprise, as if he had expected her to be there. "You're the one he was looking for," Leo said simply, sitting up but keeping one hand on the still sleeping cub. Lily knelt beside him, her movements graceful despite her apparent age. "And you're the one who found him. Thank you, young guardian, you've kept him safe." Leo studied her face with that intense focus children sometimes display. "You're going to take him away." It wasn't a question, and the sadness in his voice made Ethan's chest tighten. "I have to," Lily said gently. "He needs to learn to be a bear, to live in what wild remains. But," she paused, looking between Leo and Ethan, "that doesn't mean this is goodbye forever. The city is encroaching on the wild places more each year. The animals need friends, advocates, people who understand them. Your son could be one of those people if you're willing." The cub woke then, stretching like a cat before noticing Lily. Instead of running to her as Ethan expected, it pressed closer to Leo, making a small sound of distress. Lily's face softened even more. "You see, he's already chosen. The bond between them has been formed." "What are you suggesting?" Ethan asked, moving to stand behind his son protectively. Lily stood, her joints creaking slightly, and faced him squarely. "I'm old, Dr. Marshall. I've been protecting and caring for the urban wildlife for longer than you've been alive, but I won't be here forever. I need someone to learn what I know, to carry on the work. Your son has the gift. More than that, he has the heart for it. I'm not asking you to decide now, I'm just asking you to consider it. Let me take the cub today, but let me also come back. Let me teach Leo about the animals, about the secret wild places that still exist in this concrete jungle. Let him be part of something important." Ethan wanted to refuse immediately. It sounded dangerous, irresponsible. But looking at his son's face, seeing the hope there mixed with resignation, he hesitated. Leo had been drifting since Sarah's death, going through the motions of childhood without really living. This cub, this strange woman, this impossible situation had brought him back to life in a way that no therapy, no amount of father-son talks had managed. "Leo," he said softly, "what do you think?" His son looked up at him with those two wise eyes. "I think Mommy would want me to help. I think this is why I can do what I do, to help them when they need it." The simplicity of the statement, the certainty in Leo's voice, decided it for Ethan. Sarah would have said yes without hesitation. She would have seen this as a gift, an opportunity, a purpose, and maybe that's exactly what it was. "All right," he heard himself say, "but I want to be involved. I want to know where you're taking him, what you're teaching Leo. Everything needs to be safe." Lily's smile was radiant. "Of course, Doctor. I wouldn't have it any other way. In fact, your medical knowledge could be quite useful. Urban wildlife faces many challenges, many injuries. Perhaps this partnership could benefit everyone." The next hour was bittersweet. Lily produced a carrier from somewhere, Ethan didn't see where, lined with soft grass and smelling of forest. The cub was reluctant to enter it, clinging to Leo until the boy whispered something in its ear that Ethan couldn't hear. Whatever he said worked. The cub crawled into the carrier, though its eyes never left Leo's face. "I need to take him to a safe place first," Lily explained. "Let him decompress, check him for injuries or illness, but if you're willing, I could bring him back to visit in a few days. The bond between them shouldn't be severed abruptly." Leo nodded solemnly, his hand resting on the carrier. "His name is Courage," he announced suddenly, "because he was brave enough to find help when he needed it." Lily's eyes misted. Courage, a perfect name for a perfect little bear. I'll make sure he knows it. She picked up the carrier with surprising ease for someone her age and size. At the door, she turned back to them. "You've done something wonderful here, both of you. You've shown that the divide between human and nature doesn't have to exist. That compassion can bridge any gap. I'll be in touch soon." After she left, the house felt empty, despite the rising sun filling it with light. Leo stood at the window, watching until Lily's figure disappeared around the corner, though Ethan hadn't seen any vehicle she might have come in. "Do you think we'll really see him again, Daddy?" Leo asked, his voice small. Ethan pulled his son into a hug, holding him tight. "I think we will, buddy. I think this is just the beginning of something amazing." Leo hugged him back, and for the first time since Sarah's death, Ethan felt like they were going to be okay. Different than before. Changed by loss, and now by this strange magic, but okay. The clinic that day was surreal. Ethan went through the motions of examining patients, prescribing medications, discussing treatment plans, but his mind kept returning to the previous night. Jessica noticed his distraction but attributed it to fatigue, suggesting he go home early. He almost told her about the cub several times, but stopped himself. How could he explain without sounding insane? Instead, he focused on his work, on the normal, predictable world of medicine, even as he knew that his understanding of what was possible had been fundamentally altered. Leo was different when Ethan picked him up from school that afternoon. His teacher mentioned that he had spent recess sitting quietly by the fence that bordered a small wooded area behind the playground, seemingly talking to the squirrels and birds. He said he was telling them about his friend, the teacher said with a concerned smile. "He seems to have quite an imagination." Ethan just nodded, thanking her, knowing that Leo's imagination was the least of what was happening. In the car, Leo was quiet but not sad. "I can feel him," he said suddenly as they drove home. "Courage. He's okay. He's eating berries and playing in water. Lily is teaching him to fish." Ethan didn't question how Leo knew this. After everything that had happened, he was learning to accept the impossible. That evening, as they ate dinner, Leo asked, "Do you think Mommy sent courage to us?" The question caught Ethan off guard, his fork halfway to his mouth. He set it down and really looked at his son. "What makes you think that?" Leo pushed his peas around his plate, thinking, "Because courage came right when we needed him most, and he made us remember how to be happy again. That seems like something Mommy would do." The logic was flawless in its simplicity. Ethan reached across the table and took his son's hand. "Maybe she did, buddy, maybe she did." They finished dinner in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, but somehow more connected than they had been in months. That night, Leo slept in his own bed without protest for the first time since they had brought Courage home. Ethan checked on him several times, finding him sleeping peacefully, a small smile on his face. The empty nest of blankets by the fireplace remained where they had left it, a reminder of the magic that had briefly visited their home. 3 days passed. 3 days of normal routine, of patience and school and dinner and bedtime stories. But underneath the normalcy was a current of anticipation, of waiting. Leo would pause sometimes, his head tilted as if listening to something only he could hear, and then smile. "Soon," he would say when Ethan asked what he was thinking about. On the third evening, just as the sun was setting, there was a knock at the door. Leo ran to answer it before Ethan could stop him, flinging it open to reveal Lily standing there with a large basket. From inside came a familiar snuffling sound. "Someone has been very insistent about visiting," Lily said with a smile, setting the basket down. The lid popped open and Courage tumbled out, larger than he had been just 3 days ago, his fur clean and shining. He bounded straight to Leo, nearly knocking the boy over in his enthusiasm. Leo laughed, really laughed, as the cub licked his face and climbed all over him. Ethan felt his eyes burn with unshed tears at the joy on his son's face. "He's learned so much already," Lily said, watching the reunion with satisfaction. "He can catch fish, find edible plants, build a proper den, but every evening he sits at the edge of the clearing where I keep him and looks toward the city. He misses his friend." "Can he stay for a while?" Leo asked hopefully. Courage, now calm in his arms, content to be held. Lily nodded. "A few hours. I thought perhaps we could talk about the future while they play." She looked at Ethan meaningfully. They sat in the living room. Leo and Courage on the floor with an array of toys that the cub seemed to remember from his previous visit, while Lily explained her proposition in more detail. She spoke of the network of small wild spaces throughout the city, pocket parks and abandoned lots where nature persisted despite human encroachment. She talked about the animals that lived there, not just bears but foxes, raccoons, possums, countless birds, all trying to survive in an urban landscape. "They need advocates," she said, her voice passionate despite its softness. "People who understand that the city belongs to them too, that we can coexist if we try. Your son could be one of those advocates. He has the gift, but more importantly, he has the heart. I could teach him not just about the animals, but about conservation, about urban ecology, about the delicate balance that exists even here in the concrete jungle." Ethan listened, asked questions, raised concerns. Lily addressed each one patiently, thoroughly. She spoke of safety measures, of gradual introduction, of always having adult supervision. She mentioned other children she had taught over the years, many now adults working in conservation, veterinary medicine, wildlife rehabilitation. "And what about Courage?" Ethan asked, watching the cub play with his son. "What happens to him?" Lily's expression grew serious. "That depends partly on you. He can't live in the wild full time, not anymore. The bond with Leo has changed him, made him too trusting of humans. But he can't live in a house either. He needs something in between. I have a place, a sanctuary of sorts, where urban wildlife that can't fully return to the wild can live safely. Courage could stay there, and Leo could visit, help care for him, learn from him." It was a lot to process, a lot to consider. But watching Leo with Courage, seeing the purpose and joy in his son's face, Ethan found the decision had already been made. "Okay," he said simply. "We'll try it. But slowly, carefully. Leo's safety comes first." Lily's smile was radiant. "Of course. We'll start with simple visits, just Leo learning about the animals, spending time with Courage. Nothing dangerous, nothing overwhelming. Just a boy and his bear, and the lessons they can teach each other." As the evening progressed, Lily told them stories of the city's hidden wildlife, of the secret paths that animals use to navigate the urban landscape, of the old magic that still existed in unexpected places. Leo listened with rapt attention, occasionally adding his own observations about animals he had encountered. Courage dozed in his lap, occasionally opening one eye to check that his friend was still there. It was domestic and wild at once, normal and magical, intertwined in a way that no longer seemed impossible to Ethan. When it was time for Lily and Courage to leave, the parting was easier than before. Leo hugged the cub tight, whispered something in its ear that made it huff happily, and then helped settle it back in the basket. "I'll see you soon," he said with confidence. "Very soon," Lily promised. "This weekend, if your father agrees, you can come see where Courage is living. Meet some of the other animals. Begin to learn." Leo looked at Ethan with such hope that there was really only one answer possible. "This weekend sounds perfect," Ethan agreed. After they left, Leo helped Ethan clean up the toys Courage had played with, chattering excitedly about all the things he wanted to learn, all the ways he could help the animals. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Ethan found himself getting caught up in it, suggesting they go to the library tomorrow to get books about urban wildlife, about conservation. And maybe, Leo said thoughtfully, we could start leaving water out for the birds in our yard, and plant flowers that butterflies like. Lily said every little bit helps. That night, as Ethan tucked Leo into bed, his son asked, "Are you happy, Daddy, about all of this?" Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, considering the question. Was he happy about his son befriending a bear cub? About getting involved with an elderly woman who claimed to protect urban wildlife through methods that seemed to involve actual magic? About stepping so far outside his comfort zone of science and logic? "You know what?" he said finally. "I am happy. For the first time in a long time, I'm really happy. This isn't what I expected, but maybe that's exactly why it's perfect." Leo smiled, that wise smile that reminded Ethan so much of Sarah. Mommy always said the best things in life are the ones you don't see coming. The truth of it hit Ethan like a physical blow. Sarah had said that often, usually when he was stressing about plans or worrying about the future. She had believed in serendipity, in magic, in the unexpected gifts that life could bring if you were open to receiving them. She was right, Ethan whispered, kissing his son's forehead. She was absolutely right. The weekend came quickly. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, perfect for what Lily had called an adventure. She met them at a small park on the edge of the city, one Ethan had driven past hundreds of times without really noticing. "Through here," she said, leading them down what looked like an overgrown path between two buildings. The path opened into a hidden courtyard that shouldn't have existed, a pocket of wilderness surrounded by walls covered in ivy and flowering vines. It was like stepping into another world, one where the city noise faded to a distant hum and birdsong took over. Courage was there, playing with two other young animals, a fox kit and what looked like a raccoon. When he saw Leo, he bounded over with such enthusiasm that he tumbled head over heels, making Leo laugh. "This is one of my sanctuaries," Lily explained as Leo and Courage reunited. "There are 7 throughout the city, hidden in plain sight. Places where injured or orphaned animals can recover, where those who can't return to the wild can live safely." The space was larger than it appeared from the entrance, with what looked like natural dens built into the walls, a small pond, fruit trees, and garden plots. "How is this possible?" Ethan asked, his logical mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "The city maps don't show this space." Lily smiled that knowing smile. "Maps show what people expect to see, Doctor. But the city is older than its maps, and nature has ways of claiming spaces that humans have forgotten. This particular sanctuary has been here for over 100 years, hidden and protected by those who understand its importance." She showed them around, introducing them to the various animals that called this place home. Some were permanent residents, too injured or humanized to survive in the wild. Others were temporary, recovering from injuries or learning skills they would have learned from parents who were no longer alive. Leo absorbed everything like a sponge, asking questions, making observations that impressed even Lily. He seemed to have an instinctive understanding of each animal's needs and personalities. The fox kit, shy with most humans, played with him readily. A one-winged hawk, normally aggressive, allowed him to stroke its feathers. Even the ancient turtle that Lily said had been there longer than she had, emerged from its pond to investigate this new visitor. "He's even more gifted than I thought," Lily told Ethan quietly as they watched Leo help feed the animals. "This kind of connection, I've only seen it a few times in my life. Your son could do incredible things for urban wildlife conservation if he chooses to." The visit lasted all morning. Leo learned how to prepare food for different animals, how to recognize signs of illness or distress, how to move quietly and calmly so as not to frighten the Shire residents. Courage stayed by his side throughout, occasionally running off to play with the other young animals but always returning to Leo. The bond between them was obvious and beautiful, a friendship that transcended species in a way that made everything else seem possible. When it was time to leave, Leo didn't cry or protest. He hugged Courage, promised to return soon, and walked away with his head high. "He understands," Lily said approvingly. "He knows that love sometimes means letting go, that Courage needs to be with his own kind as much as he needs human friendship." That's a wisdom many adults never achieve. As they walked back through the hidden path to the regular world, Ethan felt like they were crossing more than just physical space. They were crossing between worlds, between the ordinary and the extraordinary, and somehow, miraculously, they had been given passes to both. "Next week," Lily said as they parted, "I'll show you another sanctuary. And Leo can start learning about the healing work we do. Your medical knowledge would be invaluable there, Doctor, if you're interested." Ethan was interested. More than interested. He was beginning to see how his medical training could serve a purpose he had never imagined, how his son's gift and his own skills could combine to make a real difference. It wasn't the life he had planned, wasn't the future he had envisioned for himself and Leo after Sarah's death. But it was better. It was magical and meaningful and full of possibility. That night, as he and Leo looked through the wildlife books they had borrowed from the library, Ethan thought about Sarah again, about how she would have loved this turn their lives had taken, about how, maybe, in some way he couldn't quite understand, she had orchestrated it all. "Daddy," Leo said, looking up from a picture of a bear cub that looked remarkably like Courage, "do you think there are other kids like me who can talk to animals?" Ethan pulled his son close. "I think there might be, buddy. And maybe, with Lily's help, we can find them. Maybe we can build something amazing together." Leo smiled, that bright, hopeful smile that had been absent for so long after Sarah's death. "Like a team of animal helpers?" "Exactly like that," Ethan agreed, ruffling his son's hair. "A team that helps bridge the gap between the human world and the animal world. A team that makes sure creatures like Courage always have safe places to go when they need help." As they continued reading, planning, dreaming about the future, Ethan felt a sense of peace settle over him. The grief for Sarah was still there, would always be there, but it no longer consumed him. It had transformed into something else, something that included gratitude for the time they had shared and hope for the future that was unfolding. A future that included bear cubs in medical supply rooms, elderly women who might be magic, hidden sanctuaries in the heart of the city, and a little boy who could speak the language of the wild. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it was the life they had been given, and it was beautiful. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Every Saturday, Ethan and Leo would meet Lily at one of her sanctuaries. Leo would work with the animals while Ethan learned to apply his medical knowledge to wildlife care. He treated infected wounds, set broken bones, administered medications to sick raccoons and injured pigeons. It was challenging, different from human medicine in ways that fascinated him. Animals couldn't tell you where it hurt, couldn't follow post-treatment instructions, couldn't understand that you were trying to help. But Leo could bridge that gap, somehow communicating with the animals in a way that calmed them, that made them trust, Courage grew rapidly, but his bond with Leo never weakened. If anything, it grew stronger. The bear cub was learning to be independent, to forage and fish and climb, but he always greeted Leo with the same enthusiastic joy, always seemed happiest when his human friend was near. Lily said it was unusual but not unheard of. Sometimes, she explained, an animal and a human form a bond that transcends normal relationships. They become family in a way that has nothing to do with species. Courage will always be wild, but he will also always be Leo's friend. That's the magic of it. The magic. Ethan was beginning to accept that word, to understand that not everything needed a scientific explanation. Some things simply were, and fighting against them was like fighting against the tide. The city's hidden wildlife network was one of those things. The more he learned from Lily, the more he realized how vast and intricate it was. There were people throughout the city who left food and water out for animals, who built secret shelters, who called Lily when they found injured creatures. It was an invisible community dedicated to preserving the wild spaces that remained, to protecting the animals that most people never even noticed. Leo thrived in this world. His confidence grew, his sadness lifted, and his natural empathy found a purpose. He started a wildlife club at school, teaching other children about urban animals and how to coexist with them peacefully. His teacher, the same one who had been concerned about him talking to squirrels, now praised his leadership and passion. "He's really found himself," she told Ethan at a parent-teacher conference. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. He's like a different child." If only she knew, Ethan thought, how different their lives had become. One evening, about 2 months after they had first found Courage, Lily showed up at their door unexpectedly. Her usually calm face was troubled. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "The city is planning to develop the land where one of my largest sanctuaries is located. If they do, dozens of animals will lose their homes. Courage's mother came from that sanctuary. It's where I was planning to release him when he's fully grown." Leo, who had been doing homework, immediately joined them. "We can't let that happen," he said with fierce determination. "Those animals need that space." Lily smiled despite her worry. "That's why I'm here. I think it's time we went public, at least partially. The city council needs to know that these spaces exist, that they're important, but I can't do it alone. I need respectable, believable people to stand with me." She looked at Ethan meaningfully. A doctor's word carries weight, and a child who can demonstrate a remarkable connection with urban wildlife that could be powerful. It was a risk. Going public meant exposing Leo's gift, meant potentially opening themselves up to scrutiny and skepticism. But looking at his son's determined face, Ethan knew they had to try. The city council meeting was 3 weeks away. They spent that time preparing, documenting the sanctuaries, without revealing their exact locations, gathering evidence of the urban wildlife that depended on these spaces. Ethan used his medical credentials to write reports on the health benefits of urban green spaces, on the importance of biodiversity even in cities. Leo practiced what he would say, how he would explain his connection to the animals without sounding unbelievable. Lily reached out to her network, gathering support from the invisible community that had been protecting urban wildlife for generations. The night before the meeting, Leo couldn't sleep. He sat by his window, looking out at the city lights. "Do you think they'll listen, Daddy?" he asked when Ethan came to check on him. "I don't know, buddy, but we have to try. Courage and all the other animals are counting on us." Leo nodded, his small face serious. "Mommy would want us to fight for them. She always said we should stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. The wisdom of it, the echo of Sarah in their son's words, made Ethan's throat tight with emotion. "You're right. She would be so proud of you, Leo, so proud of the person you're becoming." The council meeting was packed. Word had spread through Lily's network, and dozens of people had come to support them. Ethan recognized some faces from the sanctuaries, people he had seen dropping off injured animals or volunteering their time. But there were many more he didn't know, ordinary citizens who had been quietly supporting urban wildlife in their own ways. When it was their turn to speak, Lily went first. Her voice strong despite her age, she spoke of the history of the city, of how humans and animals had always shared this space, of the importance of preserving what wild remained. Then it was Ethan's turn. He presented his medical perspective, talking about the mental and physical health benefits of green spaces, about the importance of biodiversity for disease control, about how cities that embraced their wildlife were healthier, happier places to live. He kept his tone professional, scientific, credible. The council listened politely, some nodding, others looking skeptical. Then Leo stepped up to the microphone, which had to be lowered for him to reach. The room fell silent, curious about what a child could add to this discussion. "My name is Leo Marshall," he began, his voice clear and confident, "and I want to tell you about my friend Courage." He told the story simply, honestly, about finding the cub in the medical office, about the bond they had formed, about learning that the city was full of animals just trying to survive. He didn't mention the impossible aspects, the locked door, the magic. He focused on the connection, the empathy, the responsibility humans had to share their space. "Courage lost his mom," Leo said, his voice wavering slightly, "just like I lost mine. But he found a new family, people who cared for him. The animals in our city need that too. They need us to care." The room was completely silent when he finished. Then, slowly, applause began. It started with one person, then spread through the crowd until the entire room was clapping. Even some council members were visibly moved. But the biggest surprise came when an elderly council member, someone Lily whispered had been there for 30 years, stood up. "I've been waiting for someone to bring this up officially for decades," he said. "I know about the sanctuaries. My grandmother was one of the original caretakers, back when this city was half the size it is now. It's time we acknowledged them, protected them, made them official." The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. The development was blocked, and more importantly, the council agreed to form a committee to officially recognize and protect the urban wildlife sanctuaries. Lily was named as an advisor. Ethan was invited to join as medical consultant, and Leo, despite his age, was made an honorary youth member. As they left the meeting, surrounded by supporters and new allies, Ethan felt like they had crossed another threshold. They were no longer operating in secret, in the shadows. They were part of something larger, something official, something that could make a real difference. That weekend, they went to tell Courage the good news. The bear was much bigger now, nearly ready to transition to the larger sanctuary that would be his permanent home. But he still greeted Leo with the same enthusiasm, still remembered the boy who had found him in his darkest moment and given him hope. As Leo played with Courage, telling him about the council meeting and that special way he had of communicating with animals, Lily stood beside Ethan. "This is just the beginning," she said softly. "Your son has started something important. He's shown people that the bridge between human and animal doesn't have to be a divide. It can be a connection." Ethan watched his son and the bear, thought about Sarah, about the journey that had brought them here. From loss to discovery, from grief to purpose, from isolation to community. It hadn't been the path he would have chosen, but it was the path they had been given. and it had led them to something beautiful. "Thank you," he said to Lily, "for everything, for showing us this world, for helping Leo find his purpose, for bringing magic back into our lives." Lily smiled, that ancient, knowing smile. "I didn't bring the magic, Doctor. It was always there. You just needed to be ready to see it." As the sun set over the sanctuary, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan thought she was right. The magic had always been there, in Leo's gift, in the hidden wild spaces of the city, in the connections between species that shouldn't exist, but did. They had just needed their eyes opened, their hearts prepared. And perhaps that's what courage had really been. Not just a lost cub needing help, but a key to unlocking a world of possibility they never knew existed. Sarah would have understood immediately. She would have embraced it all without question. And, in their own way, by following the path that had opened before them, they were honoring her memory in the most perfect way possible. A few chapters of mentioned part has completed. Months passed, seasons changed, and the sanctuaries became official protected spaces within the city. What had started as a secret network became a model for urban wildlife conservation that other cities began to study and replicate. Leo grew, but his gift never faded. If anything, it strengthened with use and understanding. He could calm frightened animals with a touch, seemed to understand their needs instinctively, and served as a bridge between the wild and civilized worlds in ways that continued to amaze everyone who witnessed it. Courage grew too, becoming a magnificent young bear, strong and independent, but never forgetting his human family. The bond between him and Leo remained unbreakable, a testament to the power of compassion across species boundaries. He became something of a symbol for the sanctuary movement, the bear who had brought humans and animals together, who had shown that coexistence was not just possible but beautiful. Visitors to the sanctuaries often asked to see him, to hear his story, and Leo would tell it with the same wonder he had felt that first night, finding a bear cub in an impossible place. Ethan's medical practice evolved to include wildlife care, and he found himself busier but happier than he had ever been. He thought of Sarah often, especially in moments of particular magic, when Leo successfully rehabilitated an injured owl, when Courage learned a new skill, when the sanctuary network saved another animal that would have otherwise been lost. He knew she would have loved this life they had built from the ashes of grief, this purpose they had found in the most unexpected place. One evening, a year after that first night with Courage, Leo asked a question that stopped Ethan in his tracks. "Daddy, do you think Courage was Mommy's last gift to us?" They were sitting on their porch, watching the sunset, the same ritual they had developed to end each day. Ethan considered the question carefully. "I think," he said slowly, "that Mommy taught us to be open to gifts, wherever they come from. Whether she sent Courage or not, she prepared us to receive him, to see the magic in that moment instead of just the impossibility." Leo nodded, satisfied with this answer. "I'm going to keep helping animals," he declared. "Forever. It's what I'm supposed to do." Ethan pulled his son close, thinking about purpose and destiny, about the paths we choose and the ones that choose us. "I know you will, buddy, and you'll be amazing at it." They sat in comfortable silence, father and son, united in their purpose and their memories, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as darkness fell. Somewhere out there, in the hidden sanctuaries they had helped protect, Courage was probably fishing in a stream or climbing a tree, wild but watched over, free but not forgotten. The story of the boy and the bear spread through the city and beyond, inspiring others to look more closely at the wildlife around them, to see the magic in coexistence, the beauty in unexpected connections. schools started programs to teach children about urban wildlife. The city allocated funds for more green spaces. The sanctuaries became official teaching centers where people could learn about the animals that shared their city. And at the center of it all was a boy who could speak to animals and a bear who had needed help, whose meeting in a locked medical supply room had changed everything. Lily continued to teach Leo, passing on decades of knowledge about urban wildlife, about the secret ways of animals, about the responsibility that came with his gift. She introduced him to others with similar abilities, children and adults who had been working quietly to protect and understand urban wildlife. A community formed, united by their shared purpose and unique abilities. Leo was the youngest, but often the most insightful, his connection to animals pure and uncomplicated by adult skepticism. He became a teacher himself, showing other children how to approach animals with respect and compassion, how to see them as neighbors rather than nuisances. The medical clinic where it all began became something of a pilgrimage site for those who knew the story. Ethan kept the supply room exactly as it was, a reminder of the night that changed everything. Sometimes when he was working late, he would stand in that doorway and remember the scratching sound, the moment of decision, the impossibility that had become their reality. Jessica, his nurse, who had eventually been told the whole story, would sometimes joke that they should put up a plaque. Here a bear cub taught humans about magic, but they never did. Some stories were better left as whispers, as legends that might or might not be true. As Leo grew older, his understanding of his gift deepened. He learned that it came with responsibilities, with difficult choices. Not every animal could be saved. Not every human was ready to coexist with wildlife. There were setbacks and sadness mixed with the victories. But through it all, the memory of that first night with Courage sustained him, reminded him that impossible things could happen, that connection could transcend species, that love and compassion were the most powerful forces in any world, wild or civilized. Ethan watched his son grow into his gift with pride and a little awe. Leo at 10 was more confident and purposeful than many adults, driven by a mission that had chosen him as much as he had chosen it. The shy, grieving boy who had found a bear cub was gone, replaced by a young advocate for urban wildlife who spoke at schools, attended city council meetings, and worked tirelessly at the sanctuaries. But the wonder never left his eyes. The joy of connection with animals never faded. Every creature was still a miracle to him, every successful rehabilitation a victory worth celebrating. The sanctuaries themselves evolved, becoming more than just hidden refuges. They became centers of education and conservation, places where the city's residents could learn about their wild neighbors. Garden programs taught people how to create wildlife-friendly spaces in their own yards. Workshops showed how to help injured animals safely. Children's programs, many led by Leo, fostered the next generation of urban wildlife protectors. What had started as Lily's secret network became a movement that changed the city's relationship with its wild inhabitants. Courage, now fully grown, lived in the largest sanctuary, a several-acre preserve that had been created specifically for animals like him who couldn't return to the fully wild. He was magnificent, powerful, everything a bear should be, but he never forgot his human connections. When Leo visited, which was at least weekly, Courage would appear from wherever he was in the sanctuary, greeting his friend with gentle affection that belied his impressive size. Visitors were always amazed to see the massive bear playing with a young boy like they were both cubs, but to Leo and Courage, it was the most natural thing in the world. Other animals joined Courage in the sanctuary over time. A fox that had been hit by a car and lost a leg, a family of raccoons whose mother had been killed, a hawk with a permanently damaged wing. Each had their story, their tragedy, their rescue. Leo knew them all, worked with them all, helped them all find their place in this strange middle ground between wild and tame. He had names for each, stories about their personalities, their preferences, their fears and joys. To him, they weren't just animals, they were individuals, friends, family. The work wasn't always easy. There were days when animals died despite their best efforts. Days when the city threatened to cut funding. Days when people complained about the wildlife, wanted the sanctuaries closed, the animals removed. But for every setback, there seemed to be two victories. A successfully rehabilitated animal released back to the wild. A child who discovered a passion for conservation. A city official who became an advocate after visiting the sanctuaries. The network grew stronger, more resilient, more integrated into the fabric of the city itself. 5 years after finding courage, Leo stood before another city council meeting, this time as an official youth advisor on urban wildlife matters. He was different now, taller, more confident, but the passion in his voice was the same. He spoke about the success of the sanctuary program, about the decrease in human-wildlife conflicts, about the educational programs that had reached thousands of children. He presented data that Ethan had helped compile, showing the health benefits to city residents of the increased green spaces and wildlife presence. He told stories of individual animals, making them real and relatable to the council members. But the most powerful moment came when he talked about courage. 5 years ago, a scared bear cub hid in a medical supply room because he had nowhere else to go. Today, that bear lives safely in our sanctuary, teaching countless visitors that bears aren't monsters to be feared, but neighbors to be respected. His story shows that when we choose compassion over fear, when we make room for wildness in our civilized spaces, everyone benefits. The city is richer, more vibrant, more alive because we chose to protect rather than exclude our wildlife. The council voted unanimously to not only continue, but expand the sanctuary program. As Leo left the podium, Ethan caught his eye and smiled, so proud he thought his chest might burst. Sarah would have been over the moon to see their son like this, confident and purposeful, using his gift to make real change in the world. In the audience, Lily sat beaming. Her life's work not only continued but expanded beyond anything she had imagined. The secret network she had maintained for decades was now a public trust, protected and celebrated. That evening, they all went to visit Courage. Ethan, Leo, Lily, and even Jessica, who had become deeply involved in the sanctuary work. The bear greeted them all but saved his most enthusiastic welcome for Leo, the two of them rolling on the ground together like they had when Courage was small enough to carry. Watching them, Ethan thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a night of impossible discovery to this moment of established success, from grief to purpose, from isolation to community, from fear to love. "You know," Lily said, standing beside him as they watched Leo and Courage play, "I've been doing this work for 60 years, and I've never seen anything quite like their bond. It gives me hope for the future, for a world where humans and animals don't just coexist, but truly live together." Ethan nodded, thinking of all the children who had come through the sanctuary programs, all the adults who had changed their perspectives, all the animals that had been saved. "It started with one bear cub and one special boy," he said, "but it's become so much more." As the sun set over the sanctuary, painting everything in gold and amber light, Leo and Courage sat together quietly, the boy's hand resting on the bear's massive head. They didn't need words, had never needed words. Their connection transcended language, species, logic. It was pure and simple and beautiful, a reminder that love and trust could bridge any gap, overcome any difference. Watching them, Ethan felt Sarah's presence strongly, as if she were standing right beside him, smiling at what their son had become, at the life they had built from loss. The story of the boy who found a bear cub in a medical office had become legend in the city, told and retold with various embellishments. Some versions had the bear talking. Others had the boy transforming into a bear himself. But those who knew the truth understood that the real story was even more magical than any fiction. It was a story of connection across species, of purpose found in unexpected places, of grief transformed into meaning. It was a story of how one small act of compassion could ripple outward, changing a city, creating a movement, saving countless lives. Years later, when Leo was grown and running the sanctuary program himself, when Courage was an old bear content to spend his days lounging in the sun and swimming in his pond, when Ethan had fully integrated wildlife medicine into his practice, they would still sometimes talk about that first night, about the scratching behind the door, about the moment Leo and Courage first saw each other, about the impossible made possible through love and trust. And every time they told the story, it felt new again, filled with the same wonder and magic that had characterized that extraordinary beginning. The sanctuaries continued to thrive and expand. Other cities sent representatives to learn from their model. Academic papers were written about the program's success. Leo was invited to speak at conservation conferences, sharing his unique perspective on human-animal relationships. But he always returned to the sanctuaries, to the daily work of caring for animals, of teaching children, of maintaining the delicate balance between wild and civilized. It was his calling, had been since that night he found Courage, and he embraced it fully. Ethan often thought about the different path his life might have taken if they hadn't heard that scratching, if they had walked away, if fear had overruled curiosity. He would still be a doctor, still be a father, but something essential would be missing. The magic that had entered their lives with Courage had healed them in ways medicine never could. It had given them purpose beyond themselves, community beyond their small family, and a connection to the natural world that enriched every aspect of their existence. Sarah's death had broken them, but Courage's arrival had rebuilt them into something stronger, more complete. The ripple effects continued spreading. Children who went through Leo's programs grew up to become veterinarians, conservationists, environmental lawyers. The sanctuaries inspired urban planning that incorporated wildlife corridors and green spaces from the beginning. The city became known as a model for urban wildlife management, attracting researchers and conservationists from around the world. And at the heart of it all was the story of a boy and a bear, a testament to the power of unexpected connections and the magic that could happen when humans opened their hearts to the wild. Lily lived to see the full flowering of her life's work, passing away peacefully at 93, surrounded by the animals and people she had brought together. Her funeral was held in the largest sanctuary, attended by hundreds whose lives she had touched. Leo spoke about her legacy, about the wisdom she had passed on, about the network of protection she had built for urban wildlife. But mostly, he talked about her belief in magic, in the connections that transcended logic, in the importance of seeing the wild in the civilized and the civilized in the wild. Courage seemed to understand that she was gone, spending that day unusually quiet, sitting in the spot where she used to stand when she visited. Her passing marked a transition. Leo, though still young, took on more responsibility for the sanctuaries. Ethan became the medical director for all wildlife operations. New people joined the cause, bringing fresh energy and ideas, but the core mission remained the same: to protect and celebrate the wildlife that shared the city, to foster connections between humans and animals, to prove that coexistence was not just possible but beneficial for all. The work Lily had started in secret continued in the open, stronger and more vital than ever. Time moved forward, as it always does. Leo grew from a boy to a young man, his gift with animals never fading but evolving, becoming more nuanced and sophisticated. He developed new techniques for wildlife rehabilitation, wrote guides for urban wildlife management, mentored other young people with similar gifts. But he never forgot the wonder of that first connection with Courage, never lost the joy of working with animals. Every day brought new challenges and rewards, new animals to help, new people to teach, new ways to strengthen the bond between the human and natural worlds. Courage aged gracefully, becoming something of an elder statesman among the sanctuary animals. Younger bears were brought to him for a socialization, and he was patient and gentle with them, teaching them bear behaviors they couldn't learn from humans. He was a bridge between worlds in his own way, wild enough to teach bear culture, but tame enough to live safely near humans. His bond with Leo never weakened. Though their play became gentler as Courage aged, they would often just sit together, the grown man and the elderly bear, comfortable in each other's presence without need for interaction. The medical supply room, where it all began, was eventually turned into a small museum of sorts, displaying photos and stories from the sanctuary program's history. The lock that had mysteriously failed that night was preserved under glass, along with a photo of young Leo holding baby Courage. Visitors would stand in that small room, trying to imagine how a bear cub could have gotten in there, how such an impossible thing could have happened. But those who had been touched by the magic of the sanctuaries understood that some things didn't need explaining, only accepting. 20 years after that first night, Leo stood in that same room with his own young daughter, telling her the story of how he had found Courage. She listened with wide eyes. The same wonder her grandfather Ethan had seen in Leo all those years ago. "Can I meet him?" she asked eagerly. Leo smiled, remembering asking his own father the same question about different things, before Courage, before the magic entered their lives. "Of course you can, sweetheart. Courage would love to meet you." And he knew, with the same certainty he had felt that first night, that his daughter had inherited the gift, that she would carry on the work, that the connection between human and animal would continue through another generation. They walked to the sanctuary together, 3 generations united by purpose and love. Ethan, now silver-haired but still strong, Leo in his prime, and little Sarah, named for the grandmother she had never met but whose spirit lived on in the work they did. Courage was sleeping in his favorite sunny spot, but his ears perked up when he heard Leo's voice. He rose slowly, arthritis making his movements careful. But his eyes were still bright with recognition and affection. When he saw the little girl, something shifted in his expression, a recognition that transcended explanation. Sarah approached slowly, just as Leo had taught her, hand extended, palm up. Courage sniffed gently, then did something he had never done with any other child except Leo. He lay down, making himself small and non-threatening, inviting her closer. She sat beside him, small hand resting on his massive head, and began humming. It was the same melody Leo had hummed that first night, the lullaby that had been passed down through generations, and Courage's eyes closed in contentment. Watching them, Leo felt the circle complete itself, the story continue, the magic pass on. "She has it," Ethan said quietly, watching his granddaughter with the same awe he had felt watching Leo. "The gift. Even stronger than yours, maybe." Leo nodded, not surprised. "Mom would have been so proud," he said. And Ethan knew he meant both of Sarah, his mother who had died too young but whose belief in magic had made all of this possible, and his daughter who would carry that magic forward. They stood together, grandfather and son, watching the next generation form her first bond with the wild, knowing that the work would continue, the sanctuaries would thrive, the connection between human and animal would grow stronger. As the sun set over the sanctuary, painting the sky in the same colors it had that first night so many years ago, Courage and young Sarah fell asleep together, the elderly bear and the small child, trust absolute between them. Leo thought about all the animals that had been saved, all the connections that had been formed, all the lives that had been changed because one night they had chosen curiosity over fear, compassion over protocol. The ripples from that single act of kindness had spread far beyond anything they could have imagined, creating a legacy of conservation and connection that would outlast them all. The story of the boy who found a bear cub in a medical office had become more than legend. It had become inspiration, proof that impossible things could happen, that magic existed in the most unexpected places, that the divide between human and animal was an illusion that could be dissolved by love and trust. It was a story that would be told for generations, growing and changing with each telling but always maintaining its core truth. That connection transcends species, that compassion can change the world, and that sometimes the most important discoveries come from following the inexplicable scratching sounds that call to us from behind locked doors. As night fell over the city, the sanctuary settled into peaceful quiet. Animals that would have died without intervention slept safely. Children who had learned to see wildlife as neighbors rather than nuisances dreamed of their next visit. And in the largest sanctuary, an old bear and a young girl breathed in unison, connected by something deeper than words, stronger than logic, more real than any scientific explanation could capture. The magic that had begun with Courage continued, would always continue, as long as there were those willing to hear the call of the wild within the civilized, to open locked doors to impossible possibilities, to believe that love could bridge any gap. Ethan and Leo walked home together through the city streets, past the hidden entrances to sanctuaries, past the homes of people whose lives had been touched by their work, past the medical clinic where it all began. They didn't need to talk. The comfortable silence between them was filled with shared memory, shared purpose, shared love for the wild things that had taught them so much about being human. Above them, the city lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere in the darkness, urban wildlife moved through secret paths, protected and celebrated, part of the city's story now and forever. The work would continue tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. There would be new animals to rescue, new children to teach, new battles to fight for preservation and coexistence. But tonight, walking through the city that had become a model for human-wildlife harmony, Ethan and Leo could simply be grateful for the journey that had brought them here. From grief to purpose, from loss to connection, from a scared bear cub in a locked room to a thriving network of sanctuaries that had changed thousands of lives. "Do you ever wonder," Leo asked as they reached their street, "what would have happened if we hadn't heard him that night? If we had just gone home?" Ethan considered the question, thinking of all the parallel universes where they had made different choices, lived different lives. "I think," he said finally, "that Courage would have found another way to reach us. Some things are meant to happen, no matter how impossible they seem. Your mother always believed that, and now I do too." Leo smiled, that same wise smile he had worn as a child, now deepened by years of experience. "Yeah, I think you're right. Some connections are just meant to be." They reached their house, the same house where Courage had spent that first night, where Leo had discovered his gift, where their lives had changed forever. It looked ordinary from the outside, just another suburban home in a quiet neighborhood. But Ethan and Leo knew better. They knew it was a place where magic had happened, where impossible things had become possible, where a boy and a bear had formed a bond that had changed a city. They went inside, each to their own evening routines, but both carrying the same sense of satisfaction, of rightness, of being exactly where they were meant to be. Later, as Ethan prepared for bed, he stood at his window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Courage was sleeping beside his granddaughter. Somewhere, other sanctuary animals were safe and cared for. Somewhere, children were dreaming about the animals they had met, the connections they had formed. The work Sarah had believed in without ever seeing it had become reality beyond anything they could have imagined. The gift she had recognized in Leo had bloomed into something that touched countless lives. The magic she had always insisted existed had proven itself over and over again. "Thank you," he whispered to the night, to Sarah's memory, to whatever force had brought courage to them. "Thank you for the scratching behind the door. Thank you for the locked room that somehow opened. Thank you for the impossible gift that healed us all." The night didn't answer, but it didn't need to. The answer was in the thriving sanctuaries, in Leo's purpose-filled life, in young Sarah's inherited gift, in Courage's continued existence as a bridge between worlds. The answer was in the 1,000 small miracles that had followed that first impossible night. As sleep finally came, Ethan dreamed of Sarah. She was standing in the largest sanctuary, surrounded by all the animals they had saved, watching Leo teach a group of children, watching their granddaughter play with Courage. She turned to him in the dream, smiled that radiant smile he had missed so much, and said, "I knew you'd figure it out. I knew you'd find the magic. It was always there, waiting for you to be ready." And in the dream, he understood that she had been part of it all along, that love transcended death just as connection transcended species, that the impossible was just another word for miracles we haven't accepted yet. Morning would come, bringing new challenges and opportunities. The work would continue, evolving and growing in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But the foundation had been laid that night 20 years ago, when a bear cub appeared in an impossible place, and a little boy knew exactly what to do. That foundation was built on love and trust, on compassion and connection, on the belief that humans and animals could share this world in harmony. It was a foundation that would support generations of conservation work, countless saved animals, innumerable changed hearts and minds. The story of Courage and Leo had become more than just their story. It had become the city's story, a testament to what was possible when people chose to see the wild as part of their world rather than separate from it. It was proof that one small act of kindness could ripple outward in ways that changed everything. It was evidence that magic still existed, hiding in locked rooms and frightened animals, waiting for someone with the courage to investigate the scratching sounds that didn't make sense, to open doors that shouldn't open, to form connections that shouldn't be possible. And so the story continued, would always continue, as long as there were those who remembered that night, who carried forward the work, who believed in the impossible. In every child who learned to respect wildlife, in every animal saved from death or suffering, in every sanctuary that provided refuge, the spirit of that first encounter lived on. Courage might one day pass away, as all living things must, but what he had started, what he and Leo had created together, would endure. The bridge between wild and civilized had been built and strengthened, and would stand as long as there were those willing to cross it with open hearts and extended hands. The city slept, but life continued in the sanctuaries. Nocturnal animals emerged to hunt and play. Injured creatures rested and healed. Young animals learned the skills they would need to survive. And in the largest sanctuary, an old bear kept watch over a sleeping child, guardian and guarded, wild and tame, separate species united by a bond that had defined impossible and proven that love was the strongest force in any world. The magic that had entered their lives with courage would never leave, passed down through generations like the lullaby Leo had hummed that first night, a melody of connection that would echo through time, always calling those who were ready to listen, to believe, to open locked doors and find the miracles waiting behind them.